to talk about all things concerning research software engineers. We heard a lot about that in our first keynote, so please give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you, everybody. So yes, oh, slides not working, hold on. Hello, we are working. I am Terry. This is my second ever year at PyCon. I came here last year, and when I was introducing myself to people, and I said I'm a research software engineer, I was mostly met with blank looks, and then I had to go through the whole process of explaining what it is I do. So I'm now deciding to stand up in front of all of you lovely people and tell you all at once. So yes, if you want to get in touch with me, please do so. I'm terrible at Twitter, but I do exist on there. Also, just email me. I'm on Slack as well. Much better at that. So, who here in the room knows what a research software actually, no. Flip that question around. Who doesn't know what a research software engineer is? Or who only found out about it from the keynote on Friday? Okay, yeah. Lovely. I'm not speaking to choir. So today I'm going to give you a very brief overview of who I am, what is an RSE, why might you want to become an RSE, and what makes it different from other careers. And then I'm going to give you a little example about a project which featured a Django API. It's not going to be a technical talk if anybody came here hoping to learn about Django APIs, I'm afraid. So who am I and how did I get here, other than the train? I spent a long time in research, from an MRes to a PhD to a postdoc. I spent about 9 years researching developmental biology and bioinformatics at the University of Nottingham, and I loved it. I loved being a researcher. I loved spending time both at the PC and in the lab and talking to people and sort of learnt so many things about tiny field of science that I was interested in. But as well as learning all about the science and sort of the research, I also learned about Python. And I am a self-taught Python programmer. I taught myself Python. Anybody else in the room teach themselves Python? Oh, that's a lot more people than I was expecting. That's good. Okay. So when I first taught myself Python, and for many years afterwards, I thought this was a bad thing. I have slowly sort of managed to retrain my brain into convincing myself that there are many pros to this. One of those pros is I know how to teach myself. Having taught myself a programming language like Python, I can carry on teaching myself new things. I know what works for me. I know when I need to read. I know when I just need to start doing something. And I'm quite brave from that. I'm not afraid to just muck in and give it a go. And start just having a play with a new framework, a new language, any kind of thing. I was thinking, oh, that might work for my project. Let's give it a go. But there are still some cons, I think, from being a sort of self-taught programmer. And one of those is not always knowing the terminology and the sort of nomenclature. For an example of this, when I was being interviewed as an RSE, one of the sort of technical interviews, they asked me, what's a decorator in Python? And I felt really stupid because I didn't know the answer. And I felt really bad and sort of slightly ashamed that I was even trying to get this job. And when they explained to me what it was, I was like, oh yeah, no, I know what that is. It's the little @ symbol, and then you @ something into something else, and yeah, no, I know what that is. I knew how to use it. I knew what it did. I just didn't know the word decorator. I didn't know the sort of the phrasing and the terminology. And I'm still, this weekend, I've learnt loads more phrases and terminology of things that I knew what it did. I just didn't know what that was called. There's those things that you kind of come across when you're sort of self-taught. I also have massive imposter syndrome. And I think, having sort of thought about that a bit more recently, particularly since writing this talk, I think a lot of that comes from not knowing how much I don't know. Having never done a course or been through a sort of a program of learning where someone said, these are all the things that you need to do or things that you need to know to be a software developer or software engineer, I kind of have it in my head that there's this enormous amount of stuff that I don't know about, and that kind of makes me feel a little bit small and a little bit of an imposter syndrome. And this may, sort of, some people might sort of see themselves in this. But yes, so going back to the research career, I was doing this postdoc. It was actually my second postdoc I was doing. And I was starting to think about what do I do next and what my career, and what became clear to me is I couldn't keep doing this forever. Research is fantastic, but you can't postdoc forever. talking to colleagues of mine, it became clear that after 4 or 5 years of postdocing, maybe a little bit longer, your salary is going up every time, and suddenly they're like, oh, why should we hire you? Well, we can take a postdoc who's just finished their PhD. They're much cheaper. We don't have funding to hire someone who's got more experience. And everyone was pushing me towards a fellowship or to sort of start running my own lab. And I really didn't want to do that. I could just about cope with the publish or perish sort of pressure and culture in postdocing. To add on to that, trying to come up with the next big idea to fund a lab, to keep a lab going, to hire more people, and if I can't keep coming up with the next big idea, those people are going to lose their jobs? No, not for me. Okay, so what do? Where do I go next? And towards the end of my postdoc, particularly after having learned Python and Django, actually, I kind of realized that I was starting to enjoy the technology and that's sort of the software side of things as much, if not more, than the research. But at the same time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to leave academia. Academia is in some ways, quite a nice little bubble, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for suits and for real-world jobs and being a grown-up. So that's the point I came across this research software engineering thing. So what is a research software engineer, and what do I do? Well, you might recognize this sort of figure and slide from Tanya's talk on Friday morning. Research software engineers live in this weird middle ground between software engineering and research. And I've been thinking about this as a sort of tightrope you have to walk down, and if you misstep, you might fall off and become researchers, and if you go one way, you become a software engineer. But I was talking to someone about this yesterday, and they said, oh, it's like a bridge. It's a bridge between software engineering and research, and I much prefer that analogy. And in fact, the Research Software Engineering Society, which only started like last week, we became an association from an association to becoming a society, sort of describes research software engineers as people in a variety of roles who understand and care about both good software and good research. Okay, so it's a bridge between the two roles. And in fact, the RSE group or community is still fairly new. As I said, we'd only just become a society, and I first heard about it and came across the concept at the second ever RSE conference. And this was in September 2017. And there's me. And I went along and I met all these lovely people, and I learned all about research software engineering, and I really enjoy it, so much so that 3 months later, this man hired me. We didn't actually meet or talk at all at the conference. We just found this out later. It's a little bit weird. But yes, so what do I do on a daily basis? Well, I generally work on short-term projects. These might be a few weeks, might be going up to a couple of months. Normally for me, it's about 3 months long, maximum of 6 months. Okay, so you've got a relatively short period of time to work on something. What I'm doing, I might be improving some code someone else has already written. I'll go into what kind of improvement that might be later. Or I might be creating something entirely new from scratch. And as well as actually doing all the software development side of things, I run training courses. So I teach people basics programming, so getting people into programming in the first place, a little bit of data analysis and version control. And I also work with the community. So that's the community of people who are doing research software engineering or are using software in their research at Leicester, where I'm based, but also with the national sort of research software engineering community. So why be an RSE? And what makes it different to research or software engineering? So it's not like an industry. And when I say industry here, I kind of mean the opposite of research, so any kind of corporate, commercial kind of world. I should also add a disclaimer that I have never worked in industry. You probably ought to know that by now, but so everything I'm saying here by saying it's different is to my generalized ideas of what a commercial job is like. So please correct me if I'm wrong afterwards, privately. So you're as an RSE, you're working with academics, okay? And there's a certain personality type that thrives in academia that probably won't thrive anywhere else. And I think people in the room know what I mean. So yeah, you have to be able to communicate with academics, and that's sometimes quite different to how you might communicate with people in a sort of commercial business world. Academics also have different ideas on coding standards and what kind of software should be considered okay and releasable. Tanya mentioned a little bit about this in her talk, so I won't go into much details. But most of the time, an academic, will work on a bit of code until it works, i.e. they get the answer they were looking for on their machine, and then they'll release it to the world and expect everyone else to be able to install it and use it and go on from that. And if you're lucky, they'll release it on GitHub. But I know some people at Leicester who've recently they've been tasked with using an old program someone had previously written, and the only version exists as a PDF. Just take a moment to think about that. Now, as an RSC, I very rarely work in a team. There's a team of RSCs, but per project, I'm working on it on my own. So it's kind of like a whole stack dev. So I'm doing everything that needs to be doing for that project. I can't hand off the sort of front-end development or back-end development or user interfaces or anything with anybody else. I have to do a little bit of everything. And what comes with that is a huge variety in projects. So I might be working on a particular library or package that needs adding into some version control and some testing and documentation. I might be building a web app. I might be building a mobile phone app. I can be doing some data analysis type things. I can do all sorts of different kind of projects. But once I've done that project, once my 3 months of time is up and we have a thing to hand back to the academics, I kind of step away. There's no real maintenance. Unless they come back and ask for more of my time, I probably don't see that project ever again. And I just really hope they're following the standards I gave them. And I really hope the project continues to get maintained. And with that kind of work of sort of you're on your own in some ways, it's quite self-directed. I make all the big decisions about what this academic might need for their project. But research software engineering is not like research either. I kind of hinted this already, but as a research software engineer, I work across a huge breadth of subjects. During my academic life, I had a huge depth of knowledge upon one tiny, tiny, tiny field in science. As a research software engineer, I work across all different kinds of sciences, a huge breadth of subjects. I've worked with physics, chemistry, archaeology, medicine, anything that kind of comes in through the door. I've got to suddenly get my head around that and learn what they need and what their science is all about, which can be quite a big jump. I also don't really do any downstream analysis. As a researcher, I would get my program or bit of code up to it works, and then I would spend the majority of my time analyzing the results. Don't do any of that kind of analysis. I might build something that analyzes someone else's work, but I would just hand that off to them, and they do the analysis and the interpretation. Now, I said projects as an RSC, certainly at Leicester, are usually quite short, about 3 months long. That is a very short period of time to academics. Most sort of academic projects might be the length of a postdoc, so 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years, or length of a PhD studentship, again, 3 to 4 years. To say to someone in academia, we've only got 3 months to get this done, please reply to my emails. It can be a bit different to life in research. But there's much less pressure. I'm not graded on how many publications I've managed to produce. It's an excellent bonus if my name is on a publication and someone's said, thanks to excellent research software engineers, we've been able to do this. But actually, sort of in terms of achievements, just being able to say to the university, hey, this person is no longer having to spend X amount of hours doing some really boring, repetitive work that they didn't have to do because we've now created something that does it for them, frees up their time, and they're now able to go off and do more research, okay? So there's much less pressure as an RSC. I also get to leave at 5 o'clock, and I don't feel guilty when I don't work on a Saturday. It's very exciting. And because I'm not in research, I invest my time in different things. So I invest my time in version control, in testing, in continuous integration. And as I said before, those concepts are still relatively alien to most academics. And one of the big things that I found different is that I'm not a scientist anymore. I used to like telling people that I was a scientist. It used to make me feel all smug. Just totally honest here. I can't do that anymore, and that feels a little bit weird. And I kind of miss that moment of going, I've just discovered something for the very first time that no one else on the planet knows. And you do lose that as a research software engineer. So just bear in mind. So to give you an example of what a research software engineer project might be like, I'm going to talk a little bit about Django APIs. But mostly I'm going to talk about this one project, okay? So we had 3 months to turn a paper form that students were filling in, and they were doing it all on paper, and then the researchers were looking at what they'd done and trying to analyze all these handwritten notes that you couldn't always read. They wanted to turn that into a mobile app, okay? All right, 3 months, mobile app. The researchers had very limited technical knowledge. They had no idea how this was going to work. They frequently mention the word cloud. I don't think they know what that is. But the mobile app itself was going to be used in hospitals. Now, I don't know about Cardiff, but Leicester, the hospitals there don't really have great Wi-Fi. So we needed something that was going to be able to have offline capabilities. And then the researchers, even though they hadn't really thought about this and didn't really acknowledge it at any point, they would need to be able to manage and analyze this data. They needed to be able to see what was coming back. They sort of just waved at their computers and said, we need to see something. So what we needed, we're going to need an API backend as well. We're going to need some sort of web app to be able to manage that data and to be able to analyze it and show you it, and as well as this mobile app. Okay, so what did I decide to do? And this was entirely my decisions as well. Did a bit of research, looked around at different frameworks, and I made the call about what we were going to do. Now, for the mobile app, I found a thing called Ionic. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Ionic. Oh, yeah. I love it. It's great. It allows you to build cross-platform hybrid apps. So they'll work on Android, they'll work on iOS. Again, the academics had no clue which one they needed or what the differences were. It uses a lot of Angular, so it's all JavaScript, a little base, or TypeScript. But you can still build an app which has all the native capabilities, which was really important for us to have an offline app because we wanted to be able to access the databases on the phone and be able to store data on the device itself. For the web app, I went down to my familiar path of Django, because I love it, and Django REST framework, very quickly whipped up an API, used the REST auth package to manage all the authentication, because of course I only wanted users who were logged into the mobile app to be able to access it. And then for the front-end side of that, super quick, bit of bootstrap templating, bit of high charts. 3 months later, ta-da! So we were able to build up an app, a mobile app, which looks great out of the box. The only thing I did was make the top bar blue. That was it. It sort of matches the web app as well. I won't go. The mobile app is just showing a bit of nonsense data that I made put in. The web app is live and real and shows confidential data, so I'm not going to go into any details, but come talk to me afterwards if you want to know what people at hospitals are getting up to. And yes, and that's what it looks like, all put together, and it works. But as an RSC, I was doing more than just the software development and more than just the technology. I actually spent time with medical students testing the app in hospitals, watching patients go through procedures, standing at the back of the room going, I'm just a software engineer, I shouldn't be here. Again, talk to me about that afterwards. But it was a fantastic experience to see how the people who were going to be using my app would be using it in the situation and in the environment that they were going to be using it in. I was also there and was invited to come along when the app and the project itself was being presented to the NHS Trust Board board meeting at Leicester. And this was a fantastic insight into how the NHS top management works. I didn't really say much, but it was interesting to watch their board meeting. And I also got to dust off my acting skills. So they were building a training video to show people the kind of situations in a ward round, for example, where people would want to be using the app, and I got to play a student nurse. So you get to get involved with these projects a kind of lot more than I would imagine most software engineers would. I also got to design the logo. I think for my first logo, I was quite pleased. Just to sum up, so in RSC, it's a relatively new job role. It's kind of carving out a place between software engineering and research. It can provide the best of both worlds, but as in all things, it doesn't always. And I thoroughly recommend Django and Ionic as frameworks if you're ever going to use them. So thank you for listening. I will take questions. Oh, sorry. One quick little thing I was just going to say, just to try and counter my imposter syndrome, I've recently started doing some freelance work in my free time. So yeah, check me out at terry-apps.com if you ever want a mobile or web app. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a couple of minutes left for questions, which is really good. Do you have any questions for Terry? We have a couple of questions, really.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. And now that I know what it means, I think I might be a research software engineer myself.
Fantastic.
But my question is, this being quite a new job, what's sort of the career path, or what's the sort of way forward in this? Or will you now be a research software engineer?
I'm prepared for you. This is not planned. Yeah, it's not very clear yet. It's actually taken quite a while to try and persuade universities that this is a job. And it's quite hard to figure out the progression because they're like, well, are you a researcher? In which case you ought to have a sort of a performance development that's like researchers, and we should measure you on your ref returnables and papers and things like that. Or are you just an administrator? Or so it's really unclear. And I think every university is doing something differently. And every university is managing to deal with this in a slightly different way. And that's the reason we have a Research Software Engineer Society, is to sort of form a body that can kind of go, whoa, 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 this is how you ought to do it, and this is the kind of things we're setting out. And the Software Sustainability Institute is also involved in doing that as well. So it's getting there, but at times I do feel like I'm just another perpetual postdoc, and maybe there isn't somewhere to go other than management. Thank you.
Hi, this is really cool, and you get to use lots of tools. But because you get to use lots of tools, how do you kind of balance breadth of knowledge versus kind of spreading yourself out too thin amongst kind of all the different technologies that are available?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So because you get to use lots of different tools, how do you balance kind of breadth of knowledge versus spreading yourself out too thin in terms of all the technologies and things that you could potentially use?
Yeah, coming to conferences like this and seeing a very quick overview of lots of different tools and frameworks and packages is great. Sometimes you just kind of have to make a rash decision, but on the plus side, that project will be over in 3 months if you really didn't like that framework, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. I haven't yet had a project which has failed to achieve anything, well, except for one, but that was STFC's fault. But yeah, so it can be quite difficult to make that call and just to go, right, okay. And you normally have to do it in like 1 or 2 days. So at the moment, I've just started a new project. It's using satellite data and plotting things I've never thought about plotting before. So I'm trying to currently test as many different packages and things as I can find to try and find the right package to use. But yeah, it's hard.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. As a PhD student, I can relate a lot to what you said. But you said something specifically, that you're not a researcher anymore. You're just a research software engineer. So do you see them as two different sets? There's no intersection? Can you not be both?
I mean, I think there are overlaps with both fields, and that's the sort of part of trying to bridge them and bring them two together. But no, I'm not a researcher. I don't have my own field of research anymore. I don't have my own sort of scientific interests that I'm pursuing. I very much work in a sort of client, sort of service kind of role now. So yes, I wouldn't class myself as a researcher. I'm just involved in research, but other people's.
Thank you again. I'm afraid we're out of time. I know that there are more questions around, so I'm sure Terry will stick around and be happy to talk to you about this. Please thank her once more before we go into a break.